All right, my friends, welcome into episode 233 of the Leaning into Leadership podcast. And today's conversation is one that is just absolutely spectacular and that you are really going to love. Joining me on the show today is Brad Waid. Brad is an award-winning emerging technology leader. He is an international keynote speaker and a global futurist who specializes in Industry 4.0, immersive technology, and the future of education and work. Brad was ranked in the top 20 global futurists and keynote speakers. He's a leading voice in augmented reality. Brad has worked with Fortune 500 companies, school districts, governments, startups across 5 different continents. And Brad has a brand new book out, or actually in pre-release as we are speaking, out very soon, coming out on the 17th of September, titled Racing the Future, How Industry 4.0 is Shaping the World of Work, Business, and Education. This is a really spectacular deep dive into all of those pieces I just talked about. This is a really fun conversation with somebody who has become a really good friend of mine. Cannot wait to dive into this. So let's get to it with Brad Waid. All right. Brad, welcome into the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Man, this one's been a long time coming, so I'm excited to have you here on the show.
Hey, Darrin, it's good to see you. Thanks for having me. As you said, we've been just getting on calls and chatting and enjoying conversation for a long time now. So I guess it's fitting we're officially on the podcast together now. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, of course. So, before we jumped on here into the actual recording, I talked a little bit about, some of your background, some of the stuff that you do, but maybe just real quick to further orient our listeners and our watchers on YouTube, maybe fill in a couple of the blanks that I didn't cover as far as who Brad Waid is.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So my career actually started in the classroom. So I was a classroom teacher for 15 years, 3rd grade, never expected to leave. Something happened in my classroom about 12 years in or so. The iPad came out and I started learning about it and used it in my classroom, even before I had a camera. Once I had a camera, I started finding different technology applications to use with my students. And what I found, and you reference augmented reality, at that time in 2012, it was a brand new technology. And what it is image recognition and software to bring digital things to life. I used it with my students and I saw something I hadn't seen in well over 10 years, an engagement so deep that I felt I could teach any learning outcome I wanted. So I spent 2 years trying to prove that. And so I leveraged technology well before we had tech coaches and everything, and ended up starting a blog. It went crazy. I started just posting. Next thing I know, I got asked to speak about what I was doing in my classroom. And all of those steps led to where I am today, becoming a keynote speaker, a consultant, all around technology, whether I'm working in school districts to, talk about adoption and not only just how to, but like why, because a lot of times we really want to know the why, not just the here's 5 great tools, because there's a lot of amazing people doing that. My lens is a little broader than that. Like, here are some great things that you can do, but here's, the scope and sequence over the next few years, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years. How do we get students ready past our education system? And so my lens is very broad, lens of a teacher with the application and the impact on a student and ultimately our environment as humans in our community.
So many good things in there. And, one of the questions that I had wanted to ask you is how does a 3rd grade teacher become, one of the global gurus on tech and AI and augmented reality, but in a lot of ways you kind of already hit some of that. So let's do that. I want to talk about education, but I also want to talk outside of the education space. I want to talk about some of the work that you do in the corporate space. Definitely want to talk about the book, but let's maybe stay in the education space, and I'll share with you just a couple conversations I've had just in the last maybe 3 or 4 days, specifically with schools about AI and about the use of AI. One of my brand new clients, one of the districts in the greater Metro Omaha area that I just started with, we were having a conversation yesterday, and they have a group of teachers in this particular high school. It's one of those destination high schools, one where once teachers get there, they don't leave until they retire.
Yep.
And so he has, a pretty veteran staff, and AI is really making them uncomfortable. Now, I will say this, the principal is doing a really good job of trying to find ways to make that happen. The second conversation right here in the Omaha Metro West Side School District, their high school principal, Dr. Jay Dostal, who's been on the show a couple times, good friend of mine, multiple times state principal of the year in different states. They have taken on right head to head with policy, implementation, all of this around AI. One of the first districts that I've heard that just said, hey, we're not going to let's ban it. We're going to put in a how we're going to teach it. I say all of that to ask the expert in education, and not just AI. There's a lot of other pieces here. Talk a little bit about maybe what you suggest to teachers, to administrators, maybe even to parents, that, this rapidly changing world of AI in particular, a lot of people are playing catch up. So what are some wise words you can share with them?
Yeah, it's a great question and a lot to unpack there, but there's some pretty high level things that we can touch on. And you mentioned three different stakeholders. You mentioned the staff, you mentioned the administration, and you mentioned the parents. Those are the adult stakeholders, and then we have the students. So one of the first things I always talk about is awareness. You have to, high tide raises all boats. Having that awareness and conversation. So people are already aware of AI since ChatGPT came out. It just blew up. So now, people are aware in a sense of, oh, we know it's out there. The real awareness comes to understanding what it's capable of and where people have access. Another point that you really want to remember is students, kids are already well ahead of most of the adults. Most of the teachers, most of the parents, look, I'm an AI expert, and there's probably still things that my children have experienced and know, just because they live in a different generation with different tools and stuff like that. So the first thing is really just awareness and education. One, knowing it's out there, and then where do we start? With the typical bell curve, you're going to have early adopters. You're going to have people who are, a little nervous about it. So really, it's really educating that front end group that, parents are a little unsure, teachers are a little uncomfortable, and that's usually veteran teachers. The teacher that had just coming in from college, they were already using it. They're already like,
Right.
oh, it's fine. I'm already using it. I helped it, with my lesson plans and stuff. So I work with the school district in California, and this is my fourth year going in with them. And we made a full plan about involving all the stakeholders, because it looks different for every group. It looks different for teachers. It looks different for parents, administration, and students. And so really, there's about a 5-step process. There's awareness, there's application, there's ethics, and then you go into, like data, and there's so much to that. Like bias. So when you go into ethics, it's, fairness and bias are really some of the big things that we talk about, and accessibility as well. Who has access, who doesn't? When someone's using AI, what does that look like? Is it skewed? Is it telling the truth? Is it accurate? And just like I'm going to date myself for a moment, but when we were, in college, we had to cite work, we had to go to
Yeah.
references and validate things. Time frames for validation is so much shorter now. A lot of people make assumptions that just because AI says it, that it's true. And, it's very accurate, but it's not 100% accurate. And when I do keynotes, I do a lot of keynotes on AI in education and in corporate. And I always show a lot of different screens and results where AI is clearly not accurate. So, but anyways, that's a lot. But the biggest thing is knowing who the stakeholders are and addressing them individually. You can do them as a whole, but you want to make sure you address the real things with them, because students are going to be at a different level than the parents and so on.
Well, I think too, and this is true in all walks of life. Certainly, a piece with my work, specifically with leaders, AI can be an incredibly powerful tool that can be an incredible time saver.
And that's exactly right. That's the number one takeaway.
Yeah. Well, even, you think about it as a classroom teacher. being able to, take an exam that you want to put out for your students, drop that into Chat GPT, maybe just have it analyze it. At what level am I asking, students? If you're in a school, if you're in a district that's working on having more rigorous types of assignments, rigorous types of assessments, or even just assessments that are well aligned with what the standard is asking, leverage ChatGPT because it will do that for you. It really will. Just again, with leaders, being able to plan your time, be more efficient with what you do. There's so many great things that you can do with the tools. Let's maybe cross the aisle, if you will, into the corporate space. You work in so many different corporate spaces, and I don't want to try and go through like every single one of them. One of the things I love about the book, you talk a lot about the future of work. You talk about work 4.0, what that looks like, how technology, all of these different pieces of technology continue to reshape what work looks like. We're a little slow in education to reshape. Some other corporate spaces would probably say, oh, no, we're slower. Certainly the folks I know in healthcare would say, oh, no, we're way slower than education. No, you're not. But we could go with all kinds of different corporate spaces, but either go general or maybe just pick one that's maybe fresher that you're maybe focusing on for an upcoming keynote. And let's talk about how, that next phase of work. What does that look like, and how does the technology kind of pull that together? And again, this is kind of the core of your book.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great reference, Darrin. As you referenced in the book, this book really came out of two working manuscripts, if you will. One was a book and one was a guide. And so I started doing a lot of research and I put all my data in a spreadsheet. And what I ended up finding out was I ended up making columns, everything on about, okay, I had technology on one, then I had like skills was another. And so I ended up learning about, and this came from working with corporations, C-level executives, hiring managers, HR, and asking, what are you looking for students coming out of the education system? And they would tell me. And so much of this were the soft skills, being able to work with, a group or a partner, being able to communicate, whether it's in email, whether it's in person, shaking hands, like somebody in the eye. But then it came down to then looking at all the technology and the hard skills, typing, word processing, and then any dependent skill, based on what job you want to go into. And so, there's a big outline of here are, a bunch of skills that we should be looking at in the education system. Like when I was in my school system, we always had a scope and sequence K through 12. And every few years you get back to certain things that you reinforce. And so by the time somebody gets through the whole system, they're well grounded in X, Y, Z, so many things. And so in the book, I point out so many of the skills that we're looking for, because then it transcends and we look at what I always say, and people always, look at me funny. I say, I believe this is how we see technology makes us more human, even AI, because what it shows us time and time and time again, technology we use to as a convenience, save time, save money, get closer. Social media brought the world closer. We were friends before we even met in person. You can go through people who've been on Twitter for a decade. We say the same thing. This is an example of how technology makes us more human. And then that way, when we're going into the workforce, I work with food, I work with manufacturing, I work with automotive, and so many of the things are true. When I go work with an organization, there's usually about 65, 70% of technology adoption and communication that is standard, no matter what business I'm in, because what they have to get better at is like, okay, like anything, Darrin, and because you coach You have coaches, it's identifying the problems, and sometimes it's a workflow problem, sometimes it's a time problem, sometimes it's a communication problem. So once we identify those, then what we see is like, okay, what hard skill or program can we use that will help us, that we can adopt to save time? And then what other soft skills can we use to help us in our communication, whether it's in email, whether it's in a Zoom call, whether it's in person, addressing a group. And then in the book, we go through some fun things. I think I identified 10, 15 fun jobs that people have never heard of: drone pilots, digital forensic, scientists, all kinds of fun things that I wanted this to be not only for teachers, parents, but also for students, that you could go in there and you could, as a teacher or parent, you could see some jobs that maybe get a kid excited, or you see a kid or a student that has really good skills, like they're really good at doing Minecraft, or they're really good at, art. There's so many different things. You can get kids excited about a job, or you can get kids excited about a skill and then show them towards a job and then go into the higher workforce. So I know a lot there and I went all over the place, but
That's okay. No, actually, what I really appreciate about that, and I know you know this about me, I'm a recovering high school principal, and a big
yes.
part of that work was designing programming for students and to prepare them for what may come next. And so much of what we talked about, not only with business partners, but within the walls of our school, wasn't necessarily that we need to teach kids the skills they're going to use on the job site, the specific technical skills, but much more those soft skills. And hearing you say that, it's been, I don't even know, 8 or 9 years since I stopped being a high school principal. And to know that still, what is demanded out there in the workspace is still the ability to communicate, the ability to, solve problems, to resolve conflict, to think critically, to communicate well, all of those types of things that, even back in our early career academy development days when we leaned heavy into that. And yes, we had, thematic academies, but there were consistencies across, just like, you talk about the 60 to 65% of, needs across the board are the same. That's pretty much how we applied that. So that's like one of my biggest takeaways from what you just said. Certainly for our educators listening in, our school leaders listening in, keep leaning into the soft skills, because that stuff is just so very important. And this takes me to another question, and I'm going to bet this is a question you've heard before, but people have got to be thinking this. I would imagine, especially if you go and speak in a school. I mean, it's one thing, you may hear this in the corporate space too, but how often have you heard, and what might be the response to, well, computers are just going to replace human beings in the space of work? Am I wrong? I mean, you've
No.
heard that before.
Yeah, I've heard it very often, and I get asked that question all the time. And it's interesting because, this as well as I do. You can go find statistics that are going to bear out whatever you really want to emphasize. From all of my research that I've seen, the best research I can get grounded in confirmation is that AI, these stats are a few months old, but AI, I'll just use AI for this example, because AI, computers, same thing. 10 years ago, it was computers going to replace us. It's AI going to replace us. It's robots to replace us, automation. It's true. We continue to evolve. Our technology, our society continue to evolve. But every time we evolve, what we do is we find out what makes us more uniquely human. So I'll give you a stat. One of the last stats I saw was AI is going to replace about 85 million jobs, and that on the surface sounds like just scary as can be. But when you do the deep dive, you find the other number, and it says it's going to create about 97 million. So it's a 12 million net gain. Okay. Now that I do believe that's pretty accurate. Now, there are some things like junior level programmers and coders, people who are programming on computers. That is probably the job that's disappearing the fastest right now. And that is very accurate. But what we're doing is we're getting other jobs that are higher level than that are opening up, because so many different things need to be managed. So to the question of will AI, or what, it's going to happen anyways, So I have a friend who's also a teacher. He's a middle school teacher, and he's been for over 2 years now. His thing in his classroom is challenging AI to be better than AI. He's like, it's out there. He said, but let's really find out why humans are better than AI and why you're better. So he uses AI as a tool, but then always finds out ways to show that, well, I used AI to start here, but here's how I improve upon it by being human. And it's really a fascinating thing. So to that point, so many jobs are going to change and evolve. Just like, like, do we make many chalk erasers anymore? No, not really. You can find like in 1895, I remember there's an old newspaper article where somebody's complaining and say the slate and tablet will never be replaced. Okay. I mean, obviously it's going to be replaced. Now we have digital smart boards, everything. Everything's going to continue to evolve. We need to be looking at what can we do as humans to stay ahead of it. AI needs to be managed. All technology needs to be managed, whether when it's automation, we saw if you look at any factory or any automotive line, automation, Henry Ford started that in the 1910s, 1915. That was a big revolution. That was like the second major revolution in industry. And that stayed around. It just improved what we were doing, brought costs down, brought jobs up, and so on. We'll continue that cycle. Some jobs will go away. But jobs will be different. There's going to be new jobs that, if you told me there was going to be drone pilots and drone racing and FAA drone pilots and pilots for drones in the military 15 years ago, you'd probably be like, I don't get it. We just didn't know enough. But now that's accurate. And so there's a whole area around just that one job, and that will continue to evolve as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you kind of referenced it there with Henry Ford. That was one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking. You mentioned early, automotive is one of those corporate spaces that you have leaned into. Let's maybe just dig a little bit more there. I'm just really
Sure.
curious. And I
Yeah.
I'll use automotive as an example, because I think that's one of the things we think about is, now, the assembly line, so much of that repetitive work can be done by robot. But let's use automotive. How is the automotive industry taking that work, or the jobs that are being replaced by technology, and retraining and moving them into other spaces?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And we'll stick with automotive because some of the transitions are easy to see. When we reference them, people could see this. So think about, I work with one plant that it has actually two different sides. It has one that is still very much human labor, and then one that is more automation, more robotic. Now, what can happen is, let's just use, the evolution of an automotive plant. So you think about the labor force that has to physically put things in, whether they're putting a transmission in, they're doing all that. Let's just say there's 200 people in that plant doing, because I live in the Detroit area. So there's an automotive, like there's stamping plants, there's, assembly plants, there's all kinds of specialty plants. And in every plant, they do very specific skill, and they're doing that. Well, what you can do, let's just say you have 200 workers who are doing that skill. Well, now, they're going to invest, $600 million in, 20 robots that do that. Okay. Well, all of a sudden these workers are displaced. Now this happens a little bit over time, but if you look at the evolution, what that does is now somebody that's a laborer, that turns into more of an engineer, because those machines, they need maintenance people. The machines break down, so they need maintenance people. So 15 of that 20 is now going to move over into the maintenance side. All of a sudden, it needs programming. It needs, 20 programmers to work on the software. So also 20 of those move to that. They're going to be engineers. They need 10 engineers. So you got 10 engineers. Then there's another 20 different jobs that come with automation. So many different things to work on: preventative maintenance, keep, timing, schedule, everything. So it's just, when I say it makes us more human, what we're doing is, like we now have bulldozers, we have things that dig trenches, we have, earth movers, things that would take, we as humans a long time. Like, if you see a house being built and they're doing a basement, they've probably got a big piece of machinery, a scoop or bucket, digging it out. 50 years ago, if you had a basement, you probably were on a partial hill and you had to take it out by hand. So that same principle continues to evolve as, where the labor goes, that something that can be automated, physically, then it moves to us using our brain a little more because we have the problem solving skills. We can, pivot real quick. We can look globally because even if you ask ChatGPT a very complicated question, multi-step, it'll work on it. But as you know, as well as I do, you have to work with it a long, long, long time to get it really down to making some process correct. Whereas human evolution, we can say things, we know communication, we know the language, we can put syntax together real well and be like, oh, I understand the global problem. This is how we'll address it.
So much good stuff in there. And this is, folks, this is why you got to get a copy of this book. And you could, if you're watching in particular, you could probably hear it, but if you were watching this on YouTube, you could see just how passionate Brad got about that particular topic. Yeah. And so, and there's just so many great things in this particular book talking about exactly what he just shared, and from lots of different perspectives and all kinds of different pieces. You've got big pieces in there around cloud computing, the Internet of Things, just on and on. So many cybersecurity. It's just so many incredible pieces that tie into what this future may potentially hold for us. One more question before I jump to the final question I ask always here on the show, again related to the book, but just related to this overall topic. The title of the book is Racing the Future. Talk a little bit more about where that comes from and how you kind of wrapped your arms around that concept.
Yeah, that's a great question. Back in is probably, I'm going to just say 2015. So about 10 years ago. I was giving a keynote, and when I first started, it was augmented reality, and then it was augmented and virtual reality, and then it was emerging technology. And what I realized was, even being in all of this, everything was evolving so fast. And this phrase and this title came to me even before AI. And once AI came out, evolution's happening so fast. We're seeing it on such a rapid scale of how fast things are evolving. So I was doing a keynote and I was trying to come up with a title. I was doing it for a school district, and I just thought, gosh, we're just racing. Like, we know the phrase, like, if you're a substitute teacher and you're doing math, like, I just got to be one day ahead of the students. I got to be one day ahead of the students. I just need to know what I'm doing, for the lesson tomorrow. And so as technology comes around, being in the classroom for 15 years, I had all kinds of colleagues, and I just remember some colleagues saying, I can't do it. And one thing I just always says, like, just, if awareness is a huge thing, and just knowing is helping, staying ahead of that. And so I felt like we're always in a race, and it came to me as like, look, we're in a race. We just need to know what race we're in, and we need to know what's around us, and we're just trying to stay ahead. I just feel like now there's so much going on that, a lot of us can feel, I don't want to say defeated, but hey, if you're in the education system, you're in business, there's a lot that's pushing at us. And it's like, I can feel a little overwhelmed. And so I did a keynote called Racing the Future, and it was getting a handle on technology and understanding how to stay ahead and how to work with it. And so this book was written out of keynotes. As when you read it, it's me keynoting, because basically every chapter is a keynote. Basically, I designed the book that way. So, because people ask, they want to see more of my keynotes. And so I wrote the book in that way. So every topic under Industry 4.0, everything from augmented reality, artificial intelligence, IoT, cyber, digital twins, and everything in there is basically me giving a keynote and sharing and explaining everything about the technology, what you need to know, and how it's impacting us in education, in business, and in industry. So Racing the Future, I just feel like it's a constant evolution that I want us to say, look, you may be scared. You may be like, I feel like I'm so far behind. You know what? Once we have the awareness, it's okay. Let's just get a handle on it, start somewhere. We can do this, and you can stay ahead of it. And just, it's great. So it's a fun title. It was fun making the cover. I love this because it allows me to share my knowledge, my passion to try to help and elevate, any environment, any community, any school system, any business I can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and certainly, shifting out of podcaster mode and into Road Dawson Publishing Mode, we're pretty doggone excited about the book too, because obviously, we have the opportunity to partner with you and to release this book with the Road Dawson stamp on it as well. So super
Thank
excited
you.
about the book,
Thank you.
folks. It comes out on the 17th of September, but it is available right now for pre-order, both on Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. So make sure you check that out. We've got those down in the show notes. You can go hit the links and get that book so you have it in advance. So, Brad, we're at that point in the show. I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the show. This is the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. So what are you doing right now to lean into leadership?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now that I've been in my industry and have some gray hairs and experience under my belt, really what I'm doing now, outside of my keynoting and stuff is really, I'm coaching, helping. I feel like my job now, outside of just my professional work, is to help anybody, elevate themselves, help a community, help a business, help a school. And so taking that leadership role, sharing as much knowledge and help that I can, whether that's, somebody that's learning how to speak on stage, or whether that's a teacher in the classroom, or it's a executive at a business, at a corporation, is really sharing everything that I know to help them be better and leave the world better than we came in. And that's really my leadership role now, is saying, okay, these are some things I've learned. I'm going to share as much as I can in context for you, to where, hey, we're going to shorten that learning curve. And, I remember learning stuff from my elders that are still true today. And so that's how I lean into leadership, is helping anyone I can to accomplish things that I have experience in.
Outstanding. So people are going to want to get in touch with you. We've shared with them how they can get the book, but how do people get in touch with you, bring you in to speak in their school, at their organization, and so forth?
Sure. Yeah. So they can always reach out on social media. I'm at Tech Brad Waid on like Twitter and X, Brad Waid on LinkedIn, Facebook. But they can always go to my website, bradwaid.com, get information there, see me in action, see what I do. Reach out. And I always say, reach out wherever you're comfortable. I'm on most platforms. So just get a hold of me. I love hearing where people are at, what they're interested in, and then working with people. So any mode, techbradwaid@gmail.com is my email. So I handle that myself, and, anywhere they want.
Outstanding. We'll put all that stuff down in the show notes so folks can get in touch with you. Man, this was a lot of fun. I'm so glad we finally had the opportunity. Brad, thank you so much for joining me here on Leaning Into Leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Darrin. It's always good talking to you, and I appreciate you having me on the show. This has been a great conversation, a lot of time. I appreciate the people watching and listening, allowing me to come into their living room in their car while they're on their way to work. So I appreciate it. Thank you, Darrin. I appreciate everything.
Absolutely. All right, folks, just one more big thank you to Brad Waid for coming and joining me here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. It was a lot of fun to sit down and have a conversation with Brad, and certainly to talk about the future of work, the technology advancements, and just how it impacts each and every one of us in our daily lives. So once again, thank you, Brad, for joining us here on the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Everything you need to get connected with Brad, to pre-order his book, to go to his website, all of that stuff is down in the show notes. And now it's time for a pep talk. So earlier this week, I had the opportunity to start working with another new client. And this particular school district is here in the greater Omaha area. And I spent a good portion of the day with the building principal and the assistant principal at this particular high school. And one of the things that they had shared with me is the work that they have done to really identify the core values of their school. They've done really, really wonderful work here. And one of their core values, they have 4 core values, is being intentional. Now, I will tell you the other 3 so you're not left in suspense. It's perseverance, relationships, and community, but being intentional. It really resonated with me. And I asked them to go a little bit further. And they said, well, what we really have identified is that being intentional means we strive to act with purpose, thoughtfulness, and clarity in everything we do, from teaching methods to relationships and to decision making. I found that just super powerful. And the more that I've been reflecting on this, and of course, 2 of my favorite words are in there, intentionality and clarity. But the more that I've thought about this, how powerful is it that we can instill in our kids, our staff, and our leadership team to be intentional. They've taken it even a step further. When they see that intentionality happening, they recognize reward and reinforce it. They've created bracelets that have each of their 4 core values, different ones for each of the 4 core values. And when they see that, they give the kids a bracelet. So, of course, being the guy who's loving intentionality, I have their intentional bracelet, which I think is wonderful. So my challenge for you this week on the Pep Talk is to really lean into being intentional. Think about their words, acting with purpose, thoughtfulness, and clarity with everything that you do. When you as a leader are really intentional about what you do, when you're intentional about your communication, with your presence in the hallways and in the classroom, with how you align your priorities, with how you utilize your time, think about how much more effective you are going to be as a leader. And for that matter, how much happier you're going to be as a leader. That's what I've got for you this week, folks. Thank you so much for joining me here on the Leading into Leadership podcast. Get out there, have a road to awesome week.